Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today we are comparing the films Parasite, The Harder They Come, and Black Girl. Let's get into it. Okay, so before we begin, I want to briefly talk about why I chose these three films. So Parasite, The Harder They Come, and Black Girl, they can all be described by the same term, which is global cinema. So what is global cinema? It is all of the films created around the world, including cinema from places such as Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, among others. So global cinema encourages one not to only look at the films themselves from different parts of the world, but to see how these films from various places relate to each other. And at first, you might struggle to see how Parasite and The Harder They Come and Black Girl can be related, but as we go through this analysis, you'll begin to see that they are related through the various aspects of film that they use. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the background of each of these films. So Parasite was directed by Bong Joon-ho. He's a South Korean director. Some of his other works include The Host, Snowpiercer, and Mickey 17. And he's well known for his very dark humor and his focus on themes of class in his movies. And Parasite is about the Kim family, who infiltrates the wealthy Park family's household as workers in order to get rich. And The Harder They Come is directed by Perry Hensel. He's a Jamaican filmmaker, and his other works include Midnight Movies and A Filmmaker's Odyssey. An interesting fact about Perry Hensel is that he struggled a lot as a filmmaker because of his lack of financing for his films. And The Harder They Come, it tells the story of a Jamaican musician, Ivan, who turns to a life of crime in order to cope with the struggles of making a living. And finally, Black Girl is directed by Simben Ousmane, a Senegalese director and author. His other works include Jala and Chedo, and his goal as a filmmaker was to create films about Africans for Africans. And Black Girl, it tells the story of Diwana, a woman living in Dakar, Senegal, who is hired by a French woman to take care of her children in France. However, when Diwana arrives there, she finds that she's being forced to do jobs that she did not sign up for. With all of that being said, what are we talking about today? Today we're answering the question, how do Parasite, The Harder They Come, and Black Girl portray a message of defiance within the context of neocolonialism? And this is broken down into two answers, which is visual motifs and composition. So before I begin this analysis, let me briefly give you a definition of each of these terms that I've just stated. So neocolonialism is when one country exerts control over another country, and this is typically done through indirect means. A visual motif is a recurring element such as an object, shape, or color that appears throughout a film to portray a certain meaning. And these motifs can also be a prop, a specific line of dialogue, or a certain sound. Finally, composition is how the characters and objects in a film are arranged within the frame. And composition, it can signify importance, evoke emotion, or portray relationships between characters. To begin, let's talk about visual motifs. So in Parasite, the primary visual motif is indigenous imagery. So Da-sung, the son of Mr. and Mrs. Park, is really into Native Americans, to the point where his family has a birthday party for him that is themed around indigenous people at the end of the movie. So this visual motif does two things. For one, it showcases neocolonialism, and for another, it foreshadows defiance. So for neocolonialism, although there are other aspects of this film that portray neocolonialism, like the park's random usage of English words and the fact that the Kim family has to pretend that they received their education in America in order to impress the parks, this motif is the most direct, as it relates the characters directly to a group of people that was colonized by Americans. So this visual motif also foreshadows defiance through the history of Native Americans. So when colonizers first arrived in America, the indigenous people that were already living there were brutally killed. So by linking the Park family to Native Americans, it foreshadows how Gunsei defies his position in life by attacking the Park family on their land at the end of the film. Next, let's talk about The Harder They Come. In The Harder They Come, the primary visual motif is the cowboy, and like in Parasite, this motif is utilized to showcase neocolonialism and defiance. So this motif first appears in the film when Ivan watches the movie Django, which is a movie that is set in the American West. And this showcases neocolonialism by showing how American influence has infiltrated the Jamaican entertainment industry. So this motif also portrays defiance when Ivan is seen in a standoff with the police. In this scene, Ivan is shown in the same position as the cowboy in Django, with him hidden behind a tree. And in Western films, the cowboy is a glorified character that the audiences root for despite his criminal activity. So by linking Ivan directly to the cowboy figure, it represents how he is able to defy the attempts by neocolonialistic forces to keep him from attaining status by gaining fame as an outlaw. And we can see these attempts through the scene in which the policeman is talking to the man that runs the music industry within the town and is trying to get him to stop playing Ivan's records in order to keep him down. Now let's talk about Black Girl. In Black Girl, there are two visual motifs actually. One is the Senegalese mask, and the other is money. So let's first talk about the mask. The traditional Senegalese mask represents both neocolonialism and defiance in this film. So when Diana is originally hired, she gives this mask to her new bosses as a gift, and this represents neocolonialism because it symbolizes Diana's relinquishment of control over herself over to her new bosses, who serve as representations of neocolonial forces throughout the film. So the mask also represents defiance in this film. Once Diana has become completely disillusioned with her life in France, she fights with the woman who hired her in order to get the mask back. And here, the mask symbolizes defiance, as Diana's desperate attempt to reclaim the item represents her refusal to be controlled by the man and woman that she was hired by, and by extension, neocolonialism. Money is another visual motif in this film that represents defiance within the context of neocolonialism. So before Diana ends her life, she throws the money that she earned in front of her employers and thinks to herself, "I did not come here for the apron or the money." Additionally, when the man that she worked for returns to Dakar with Diana's belongings, he tries to give her mother financial compensation for the death of her daughter, which her mother simply refuses by walking away. One of the indirect ways in which neocolonialism can occur is financially. So by showing Diana and her mother rejecting money from this man, it represents their refusal to be victims of neocolonialism through financial means. Now that we've discussed visual motifs, let's get into the composition of each of these films. So in Parasite, the composition is utilized to showcase both neocolonialism and defiance. So first let's talk about neocolonialism. Bong Joon-ho indicates wealth imbalance in this film, which is a major effect of neocolonialism through his arrangement of objects and characters. And this can be seen in the scene where Ki-woo first arrives at the Park family's household. So here we get a tracking shot that follows him from the front gate of the house onto the massive lawn of the Park family. And this shot, it goes from a medium close-up to a very wide low-angle shot. And this shift from this really cramped close-up to a very expansive wide shot makes Ki-woo appear significantly smaller compared to the house. And the low angle of the shot portrays the fact that the Park family has much more power and status than the Kim family. Another scene which showcases this portrayal of neocolonialism through composition is the scene in which Ki-jung is trying to get her mother a job over the phone with Mrs. Park. So during this phone call, we see Ki-jung in her room, and within this room, you can see that the room itself is very cramped and cluttered with pretty much all of Ki-jung's possessions. And then we cut to Mrs. Park, who's in her kitchen, and you can see that her kitchen is much more empty compared to Ki-jung's room. So here, Bong Joon-ho showcases wealth imbalance by the amount of objects that are within the frame. So the amount of clutter in Ki-jung's room represents her lower status, while the relative emptiness of Mrs. Park's kitchen represents her higher status. This sort of idea can be seen again in the scene where the Kims are alone in the Parks household when the Parks have gone on the camping trip. So in this scene, we see the Kims as they are gathered around the singular coffee table in the living room, and in front of them they have loads of booze and food in front of them that is all sort of clumped together, and the Kims themselves are arranged very close together. And within the scene around them, you can see that it's pretty much totally empty in this house. And Bong Joon-ho does this intentionally, as although their parks aren't directly present, you can see that their status is still shown in the scene through the emptiness around the Kims, and the Kim status is shown by the fact that they are really clumped together within this frame. So now let's talk about the defiance that is shown through the composition of this film. So Bong Joon-ho, he showcases characters defying their positions of lower status through the composition. And the primary example of this is when Gun-se exits the basement after he's killed Ki-woo. And so in this frame, we can see Ki-woo is laying on the floor while Gun-se is actively moving higher in the frame by utilizing the stairs. And this is crucial to the ending of the film, as Gun-se would not be able to execute his attack on the Kims and the Parks without his sudden gain of power and control that he gets through him moving upwards in the composition. Now let's talk about the Harder They Come's composition. So this composition, it also showcases neocolonialism and defiance. So first for neocolonialism, we can see it when Ivan first meets Jose, the man who ultimately helps Ivan begin his life of crime. And in this frame where he meets him, Jose stands out in his very vibrant yellow outfit and expensive-looking sunglasses, compared to the exterior of Ivan's mother's home, which is extremely run down and filled with junk for lack of a better term. And this, once again, symbolizes wealth and balance, with Jose's very nice, expensive-looking clothes representing his wealth and his higher status, and the scenery around him of the very run-down house representing lower status. So the composition of this film also portrays defiance, and this can be seen in the scene where Ivan is signing the record deal with Mr. Hilton. In this frame, Ivan is standing high over Mr. Hilton, despite the fact that he is technically under Mr. Hilton's control. And this foreshadows his defiance of his position in life later on in the film when he becomes a criminal. And this is really important because if Ivan never overcame his place in society, his infamous criminal activity would have never been possible. Finally, let's look at the composition of Black Girl. So, Sembène Ousmane portrays defiance through his placement of characters within the composition of this film. And this can be primarily seen in the scene where the man that Diana worked for returns to Dakar. So when the man that Diana worked for returns her items, the boy that Diana initially bought the Senegalese mask from picks up the mask, puts it on, and then follows the man until he leaves the town. Here, defiance is shown by the control the boy exerts over the man. So typically, when looking at a composition where two characters are directly placed next to each other, the character that is higher in the frame has more power or control over the other character. But in this frame, the opposite is true. Despite the fact that the boy is much shorter in the frame than the man, he exerts control over the man by driving him out of the town. So what have we learned from all of this? Overall, Parasite, The Harder They Come, and Black Girl all utilize visual motifs and composition to portray a message of defiance that is contextualized by neocolonialism. Additionally, these films conclude that defiance can't persist when it's not supported by a community, as although Gunsei, Ivan, and Diana are able to briefly defy their positions in life, they all meet very violent ends, with Gunsei being stabbed by a meat skewer, Ivan being killed in a shootout with the police, and Diana taking her own life at the end of her film. And this leaves audiences with the impression that neocolonialism is a force that cannot be overcome by a person standing alone, and that people must unite together in order to truly end neocolonialism. These are my sources, and that is all I have for you. Thank you.